I actually learned to lecture extemporaneously, thanks to the failure of technology. Very often I have been in front of an audience, having traveled a very long distance, and of course the thing didn't work, so I've had to make it up with my hands. This, again, is a situation like this. Now, I actually have two presentations. One is the theory, which is the sequence of treatises analyzed. And the other one is the actual orders, the 260 orders that we've drawn. And the one which was the one I prepared specifically for this was the one on the treatises. And I think it bears some, if you will bear with me a little bit. I actually was not interested in classicism. You know, I would actually do classical buildings, and I'd call up one of the kids from Notre Dame and say, could you get the orders right? And we probably had half a dozen buildings that are really pretty respectable. But the secret magic stuff came from a Notre Dame student or Charles Barrett or somebody. And then Catherine, who's here, Catherine Pasternak, began collecting architectural books, and she became enamored of treatises, and she began collecting the classical treatises in the original. And she'd invite me to lunch and show me these books, and I would actually not be interested at all. But eventually, in order to earn my lunch, I actually had to pretend that I was interested. This is starting about 6 years ago. I had to pretend that I was interested, and I began to say, well, before I make a fool of myself, let me read some of the scholarship on it. And then I had books, you know, by Summerson and a whole bunch of guys, and I read for about a year, and I actually had the distinct impression that I was actually going senile, I mean medically senile. Because I would read something, understand something, and then I'd read something else, and I'd say, well, I got that backwards. And then I'd read something else, and it was backwards again. Until one day I realized that actually they were actually contradicting each other. That actually the scholars were contradicting each other. They were talking, saying different things. And I thought that, well, that was very interesting, and I began actually looking at the treatises. Okay, Catherine, I accept your chicken, delicious, must I look at this? And then Catherine would tell me something and say, this is what this treatise is. And I would say, yeah, but that's not what I'm seeing here. And then we would look at something else. And this is what you know, Richard John or Jorge Fernandez or somebody would say. I said, yeah, I know, but that's not what I see here. And that, of course, pissed me off. That's what got me off, because I can't get anything done unless I'm angry. You know, that's where you get the energy, the adrenaline. And I began to see that actually, and I didn't understand what was going on until I realized that there were three separate discourses. There's the classical discourse, which I'll define, but it was actually comprised of three different disciplines within it. The classical discourse essentially begins in the Renaissance with the first treatise. You might think it's let's say the Alberti, although that was not illustrated, but it might begin with the Serlio or which is your first treatise, we basically analyzed 200 treatises in the original, and there are about 60 that are pivotal. Now, the only way that I could understand what was happening is that within the classical discourse, which is now 599 years old this year, is that it was fascinating because it's a discourse that discards very little but adds a lot. And you can actually today open a vignola and design a column, or you can actually look at something very recently done, like let's say the Marianne Cusato or the Robert Adam, and design it also. And there's no other discipline where you pull out a book. You certainly can't sort of analyze a broken neck with a Renaissance medical journal. Okay. So there was this fascinating continuous thing. So long as you bear more in mind one thing. So there's three pieces. There's the scholarship, there's the treatise, which is the polemic, and the practice. Now many people know that the practice doesn't coincide with the treatise. And they'll say, well, Palladio wrote this, but he didn't actually do that. And that happens all the time. What the architects did and what the architects in the polemics wrote about, actually there was a lot of slippage between it. So I separated the practice completely and set it aside. And I separated the scholarship and set it aside because I realized that the scholarship had its own internal stuff, which has to do with a lot of footnotes and a lot of people positioning themselves to get tenure. And that was their deal, and it's lovely, and it's really incredibly fascinating. But the treatise is something else. The treatises actually are not like scholarship. They do not have to reflect reality. They are not there to reflect the practice. They're there to deflect the practice. And the treatises are always manipulating all the time in order to deflect the practice, to make a different thing. So for example, the first example of this is Vitruvius, which was, as you know, the Roman treatise that was discovered fortuitously in some Swiss or Spanish monastery at a certain date. Well, actually people knew it was there, and there were 4 or 5 others, it turns out. But when the Renaissance came up, and they wanted to actually stabilize architecture, it was very convenient to find an ancient treatise, somebody that had walked among the gods. So Vitruvius got brought forward and was translated. And it was translated by Barbaro and by Palladio. And there's a translation very, very early. Then something peculiar happens, which is that Palladio goes ahead and writes his own treatise. And when you realize the difference between the two, it's the fact that Vitruvius actually reflected the Roman practice, and the Roman practice had a lot of slack. For example, there were only 3 orders, but maybe 4, because he had the Tuscan, which he adds later. It's not even in the same book. When you see the original, you say, okay, here are the 3. Why is it that 3 or 4 chapters later there's a Tuscan, and it's not presented with much energy? You know, there's 3 that are, and you realize, somebody must have called him up and said, hey buddy, those 3 are Greek orders, and you're a Roman architect, and if you want any work, you better put in some Roman stuff in there. You can imagine all this human stuff going on. And it's half-heartedly done. And then Palladio kind of describes proportions with not a great deal of precision, but then he says, by the way, you adjust them all the time. You adjust them according to size. Like the proportion of a little order is not the same as a big order. You adjust it. And actually the intercolumniation, or rather the number of columns, also adjusts the proportion. The number of columns adjust the proportion of each order. And furthermore, if you approach it from a diagonal from above or below, it adjusts further. And then he says, and by the way, when you're done with all this shit, check with the real stuff out there in the field to make sure you get it right. And I read this stuff, and I said, what a slacker. I mean, God, this guy's a goof. You know, compared to the Renaissance, where I had started. And I actually wrote a paper saying what a goof Palladio was. And then I realized that the slack of Palladio, of Vitruvius, the slack of Vitruvius, and the rigidity of Palladio and the Renaissance treatises is the beginning of what makes the discourse fascinating, because it's unstable. And it goes on for 500 years in an incredibly vital argument, back and forth, whether it's empirical or whether it's actually conceptual. And so it gets set up immediately to this fascinating thing that attracts the best minds for 500 years. Okay? Now, so you look at the treatises. And the treatises write about a lot of things. Vitruvius also invents the treatise. And the treatise consists of 3 parts. One is practical advice. By the way, this is how you lay out, this is how you bring water, this is how you set up a footing, this is how you do this and that. And it's kind of lackadaisical. And then, kind of do this and do that. This is the way you build a bridge, all this random shit. And then they talk about building types at the end. It's usually the order of the practical advice, the orders in the middle, and then the building types. It's tripartite. And the one thing that they seem to take seriously, they really put a lot of effort in, they're really expensive drawings, are the orders. There's something about the orders that gets a lot more of the sheer economic investment. Many more plates, many more expensive plates, and you see it like, okay, these are 3 stones piled up, but boy, we draw that order really well. Then I realized that over the years, of the tripartite, the buildings drop off, the building types drop off and change continually. Think of Duran. And the technology changes too. Because, they stop building with rubble and so forth, or Roman brick. But what is steady are the orders. right through for 600 years. The orders go through. So if you're going to do a comparison of classicism and trace it in an absolutely scientific way, you don't do the whole practice, you don't do the whole discourse. The only thing that's steady is the attitude towards the orders. And these treatises were fantastically expensive to produce. Ours was fantastically expensive to produce. I mean, I'm talking about I could have bought a major yacht for what it cost to do these renderings. Multiple times what we got in the Driehaus Award, which was invested in it. We've done probably 300 plates, and those guys were also doing plates. And very, very expensive, and the orders are very, very important. And new treatises get written with very slight variations. And why would a new treatise be written with very slight variations? Because actually it was of desperate importance what was represented. For example, just to give you an example, okay, so you get the Italians, the great Italian treatises. And the great Italian treatises, as people were saying today, are absolutely mathematical. And they compete in terms of the precision of the proportioning. And they outdo each other in terms of the precision of the proportioning. And then at one point, and a lot of emulators, and that's what I was going to show you. I was going to show you how they drew the orders and their system, and some of them stabilized the height, and the diameters changed in the drawing, in the parallel, where they're all compared. By the way, the orders are interesting only relative to each other. The single order is not interested. It's the 3 or 5 that are interesting relative to each other. They have different diameters, they have different attitudes, so there's how you transform vertical to horizontal to vertical, right? One of them resolves diagonal, one of them resolves frontally, etc. They're very, very important to people. And what happens is that they make these slight variations that take on theological importance. Whoa, this guy's better than that guy, okay? And then something peculiar happens, and I took the 60 treatises we analyzed. By the way, in the first volume of this book, you have the frontispiece of the treatise, and then you have the parallel, the plate of the parallel to see how they're drawn, and then you take the third and fourth pages are the Ionic. And so there's actually in a deeper analysis even of the Ionic, and the Ionic is more expressive than the others. It's the least stable of them. So you can actually do a really deep analysis of the thinking just through the order, particularly the Ionic order. So you do these things, and then something peculiar happens. Well, actually, you do a diagram. We begin to do diagrams, Catherine and I, and you begin to see that the original treatises are Italian. You do it by age. We have 4 columns: Italian, French, English, and American, and U.S. And it's the most amazing thing. When I showed this in Notre Dame, no one had seen this diagram before. The treatises tend to be Italian, then they shift to the French, then they shift to the English, and then they shift to the American. This fantastic move west. Okay. And each of these 4 coincides with a different recall to order. They're alike. Each group is alike, and each one does something different. Okay. So what happens was that the Italians have this tremendous, the prestige of the Italians is unbelievable. I mean, Louis XIV or XIII, I forget, 14, is bringing, who was it? Was it Bramante to do the Versailles? Bernini to do Versailles. I mean, this is the King of France bringing an Italian to do the palace. And of course, Perrault gets it in the end. And there's this backlash from France, that is led by Mazarin, Cardinal, I think it's Colbert. Colbert actually leads an attack on Italy that consists of 3 missiles that are sent to destroy the French. The first one is, he sends one guy to actually measure the ruins that Palladio had measured. Because the Palladio has some Roman orders at the end, perfectly measured. And he sends a Frenchman, and the measurements are wrong. They're really precisely done, like laser. They've been redone with laser. This guy, who was it? Leroy. Degodet goes and measures the Roman ruins, and Palladio is wrong. Prestige, bam. Okay, and then is it Leroy who goes and does the comparison? Okay, Freyard de Chambray then goes and measures all the Italians, old and new, in paired comparisons. Remember, these guys are working within a 60th of a diameter. We're talking about They're analyzing the number of angels dancing on the head of a pin. It's pure theology. And they're analyzing to a 60th of a diameter, and this guy, Freyr, goes big and analyzes them, puts them next to each other, and they're not the same. They're not the same. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Right? And who's the third guy? And then, well, anyway, there's another guy that is another Scud missile sent to destroy the Italians. And then Perrault translates Vitruvius, and he finishes the Vitruvius translation. He finishes it. And then 5 years later, just like Palladio, he writes his own treatise. Because Vitruvius is a slacker, and the Frenchman doesn't like it. So what he does, he takes, and by the way, once you see, and then Perrault actually does the first absolutely rational, completely elegant parallel in which the step of the orders is by an exact dimension. Not only above, but actually below with the pedestals. They grow beautifully, and the elements within step rationally. And there's this completely beautiful system. Then you go back to look at the Italians, and it's a hack session. It's a Latin American hack session. You know, they're not even the right thing. And you say, whoa, these Italians are the has-beens. It's now France. In the meantime, the Brits and France dominates. And they start the schools and Blondel, and they begin rationalizing, and Diderot, the encyclopedist, writes his own treatise, which is absolutely rational, and which, for example, all the scrolls that appear in all the various orders are actually the same diameter. So he stabilizes it even further. So the French are rationalists. The Italians are theologians. They're actually arguing over the head of the pin. The French are rationalists, and the English, by the way, are coming up with this and saying, oh my God, this Italian dimensional stuff, and they come up with the carpenter's manuals. And what the British actually do, the Gibbses and Chambers and so forth, is they actually do much more practical ways to increase the, basically to do it on the site. And the English books are all worn out. They actually go out to the site. They're smaller, they're worn out. The French books are in the library. So it goes from the architects as a profession to actually the builders. But then something happens, which is the fundamental crisis. Okay? They discover Pompeii. Remember, the orders presented by the Italians has diversity in ornamentation. You can wiggle it this way or that way, or put leaves, or put little bull's heads or little flowers on it. But the proportions are always steady. They're absolutely invariant. The proportions are invariant. Even when you do Baroque buildings, wiggling and shaking, the orders are stable. Okay? The buildings can change, the ornament on the column can change, but the proportions are invariant. And they find Pompeii, and next to Pompeii is Paestum. And they find the temples in Paestum, and then Sicily, are exactly the opposite system. Instead of having invariant proportion, but variant ornamentation, the Greek orders of the Tyrian Sea, actually have exactly the same ornamentation. They're invariant, but the proportions vary radically. They're fat, they're thin, they're tall, whatever. Okay. When this comes in, this hack section comes in, it's not by a bunch of Gothic hicks, it's by the Greeks. Total crisis. Okay, it's as if they had gone to Mars and discovered life, but life based on ammonia instead of carbon. Can you imagine the freak out in the classical? You know, there's another God. Oh my God, everything we believed in proportion has actually been dismantled by the discovery of Greece. And it comes in, and it causes an unbelievable crisis. And the way they solve it is they appear on the new treatises, and the orders sit on each other like by mouth, and by, the Germans were better at this. The French didn't like this much. But they actually get, Normand eventually did it, the orders appear right next to each other. They just appear phenomenologically, according to the temple, not Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, but the temple of whatever. And they sit like butterfly specimens. Just like the biologists that we're beginning to explore. It just absolutely tracks. It tracks from a theological system late theological system to a rationalist system to an empirical system. You don't reconcile them, they just sit, and the orders look different, they just sit next to each other. Okay? And it comes in just in time for and there's another theme, which is the recall to order, in which discipline and it's brought back. I had to begin diagramming. I said, what's going on? Like, what's the difference between Georgian and federal and all this shit? And it's the historians that made up these names. They make up all these names all the time. And actually, there are really 4 very clear periods in which it drifts away and it comes back, it drifts away and it comes back. And the Greek orders arrive just in time to clean up after the Baroque and Rococo. And you get Logier, and the Greek orders, they just cleanse it because of the discipline. You know, and it's an architecture that's tradiated exclusively, etc. No screwing around with arches, no screwing around with pedestals, no screwing around with, bent gables on top, and the Greeks clean it up. And that's where you get the Germans come in beautifully, Schinkel and the Germans. And then, so you get this cleansing. By the way, the Frenchman who wrote this was Logier and the primitive hut. He says we've got to go back to the origins. We've got to go back to Greece. Okay? Because this is degenerate. By the way, this coincides with the revolution. It coincides with the cleansing of society. The old kings are thrown out. You understand that the culture is tracking very closely, basically, the socio-historical phenomenon. And then what happens is that, unfortunately, in my opinion, they don't stop with the Greeks. They keep exploring. And they go to Egypt, and they go to Miletus, and they go this, and they keep exploring, and this stuff starts coming in. Whoa, it starts coming in. And these collections of orders just start getting stacked, and you get page after page after page, and the ultimate is Bannister Fletcher. I mean, that's probably the most popular. You get all this stuff all lined up, Bannister Fletcher. But what's interesting is that the British, at one point, actually the educational system of the British prevailed. And in a weird way, because you assume it to the French, it becomes academic. And they rationalize all this stuff, and you get the Beaux-Arts. You get the Beaux-Arts and the incredible professionalism that allows these buildings everywhere, all over the world, to be built at the highest quality. And the books become textbooks. And then ultimately, of course, the Americans totally clean up with Ware, etc. And the treatise goes all the way to Robert Adam, to Steve Mouzon, to Marianne Cusato, Ramsey Sleeper. Basically, you take, when you understand that actually Ramsey Sleeper is a treatise. Ramsey Sleeper, Architecture Graphic Standards. By the way, you know what's really interesting about Architecture Graphic Standards? Is that the old Architecture Graphic Standards doesn't have the orders, but the new ones do. Guess why? Because everybody had the old books back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and now when they don't, because people no longer have the treatises, it's got to be in Architecture Graphic Standards. And it takes it right up to the present, I mean, right up to yesterday. And every one of these things deflect architecture. So one of the things that you realize with all this is you very clearly see that there's actually recalls to order and drifts. And there's the modernist drift and the eclectic drift and somebody. And you can see very clearly that our fourth recall to order is a flatliner. It is the one, A, that doesn't take off, despite the fact its birth was in 1980. We're still losing, we're losing the schools, etc. However much we published, we lost all the schools, right? And you realize it's a flatliner. It's also the first recall to order that doesn't have its own treatises. Because if you look at the treatises by Robert Adam, if you look at all the treatises, including Mouzon's and Cusatos, they all revert to the orders of the Renaissance, which were actually selected by Serlio. We do not have our own treatises. We recycle the treatises, we write really good introductions like Salmon's and everybody else, but we don't have our own treatises. So we're operating off a system that was designed to overcome 1,000 years of medieval chaos, very well done by Palladio and the Italians, but we don't have one that works for ourselves. And as a result of that, what happened is that we have 260 plates by masters, which I can show you here, plates by masters that cannot be explained. So we have Plechnik. So we're teaching the kids. By the way, this is the way to learn architecture. There are the 5 orders. These are the proportions, right? And we love Behrens, don't worry about it, and we love Bolsig, and we love this, and we love that, and we love the other. We love everybody, but it is not explained intellectually. Okay? So by drawing these, we begin to diagram what are the canon of each recall, which is the canon. And by looking at the evidence of the masters of the last 200 years, we actually draw the rules as to what our canon would be. What is the modern canon? To bring 200 years of masterworks into the present and make them available for the fifth recall. That's what the treatise does, and it's the only modern treatise. There's no dogma in it. There's no doctrine in it. It's entirely empirical. It's the first treatise that's entirely empirical. It's by observation, and you draw conclusions from observation. So what happens with this observation? What is the, by the way, we draw the treatise has the 5 original orders. It has the 3 of Palladio, the 5, and actually we discovered that actually there are 19 orders. That in this last, so what happens, there's a canon, but the canon is actually bigger. Remember, the 260 orders that we drew in plates are not the canon. Those are the orders, those are the manifestations. But they point back to 19, a canon of 19, all of which are historical, including the 5, the original 5. And of those 5, 3 are fundamental, but you actually need 9. So basically, what this treatise proposes is that there's a series of canons that, for syntactical purposes, there are 9 necessary, not 5, 9. And they're all ancient orders. They're not, Doric Corinthians, but they're 9 orders. And then there are 19 that are semantically important, that actually mean things. To people who don't even know what Miletos is. But it means something. The Miletan order actually tapers backwards like this. And it appears in the 260. So we actually come up with 3 different canons, which are present. And perhaps the most important is one that's introduced by Schinkel and actually completed by Creer, which is one which is transect based. And it goes from most urban to most rural. Okay? So you get all of these present now and available, and lo and behold, it explains the 260 great buildings that we, by not absorbing them, are presumed to be modernist. And that is, there are 2 extraordinary problems, crises, in the classical discourse. The first one is when Palladio, instead of following where culture was going with vigor, which is Byzantium, in which Sinan was there, the greatest Muslim architect was Sinan, contemporaneous with Palladio, and Barbaro, his client's brother, was the ambassador. So Palladio knew perfectly what was happening in Constantinople, or in Byzantium, or whatever it was. And what was it called then? Istanbul.
No, it wasn't changed to Istanbul until later. It was still Constantinople.
Okay, so Constantinople. So culture was going to Constantinople with incredible vigor. And what they were doing was resolving the syntactic deficiencies, which we all know. If you've ever been a classical architect, it has lots of problems. To build a classical portico correctly, of course you can do it, but it ain't easy. And I can tell you exactly why it ain't easy. Okay? Those Muslims, they solved it. And it could have flowed. It could have flowed in that direction. The Palladio, in Miami at least, some of the Miami faculty thinks that it was for nationalistic reasons. They turn around and face Rome to say, this is Italian stuff. They basically turn back and face the Rome for the first time, instead of going to Byzantium. And Byzantium keeps going. Okay, which is where I think architecture should have gone. Is what they were solving there. They were actually solving all the syntactic problems. And by the way, these architects that I showed today are insurgents. They're always saying, wait, stop. It isn't just the Renaissance. And you see Sullivan, and you see Richardson, and you see all these people with their orders, and they're actually Byzantine orders. So you get, one of the readings is that people are saying, come back, wait guys, it's not about Rome, it's not about going back, it's over here. So you see these people, not just the people. So the first problem was when Palladio turned back. Okay, he did what he had to do, and he succeeded in getting rid of the medieval whatever. Okay, that was an amazing achievement, because there was no order whatsoever in the medieval orders. He did that. The second great mistake that happened was ours, our fourth recall, that by not writing a treatise that acknowledges the work of the classicists of the last 200 years, they have become available to the modernists. And all of these classical architects that are perfectly clear they're classical, from Frank Lloyd Wright to Eliel Saarinen, etc., are now thought to be precursors of modernism. So instead of being the last and the greatest of the classicists, they become the pioneers of modernism. And by the way, the modernists don't give a shit about them, they learn nothing from them. But they actually give them a kind of cultural gloss, because they say, well, really, Macintosh was one of us. And Macintosh was not one of them. Macintosh is one of ours. They're all ours. Every one of them is ours, and by not having a treatise that absorbs them, we grant them to the modernists. And so this is a play to take their territory. It's not to destroy classicism. And the five orders, the five orders actually remain, but they're not predominant because there are other canons, and that's the thing. But what I have found, and I found this to an extraordinary extent, as I began posting these over the last 5 years, they were rejected, essentially rejected by the list. And that was a shock to me, because it's so obvious to me. So obvious that they were classical, but they were rejected, and that's what I got off. And I gave you the adrenaline necessary to finish this by saying, actually, the current fourth recall is the problem we have. And that's why we can't get off the ground. Okay? Now, I have all this illustrated, but it won't open, right?
It was.
What was?
I'll get it open again.
Okay, no, I don't have the diagrams. What I have is the orders. Okay, so then there's one other thing that happens. Everybody speaks. There are different ways to talk about the orders, but the most common is the orders as language. You know, they're a language. And there's a very curious drawing, which you should all know, by Serlio, which are the three theatrical scenes, right? And they appear in very primitive woodcuts, and those three scenes are thought and always interpreted all through the discourse as being actual advice for theatrical sets. This is the way you design theatrical sets, which I very much doubted because it's not that important designing theatrical sets. But what I did is I took the translation, and instead of taking the language of rhetoric, I put in the language of linguistics, okay, the modern language of linguistics. So instead of saying satirical, I basically found that they represented vernacular, idiomatic, and academic language. The vernacular, idiomatic, and academic language. And it just translates perfectly. And the three diagrams make all the sense in the world. So what does that represent? What are these orders that are drawn, all by guaranteed masters? By the way, how do I know what a master is? By publication. Just like in academia. If you're published a lot, you're a master. So it's always Ast, Bloom, Saarinen, etc. It isn't, because by the way, there are lots of interesting orders all over the world, but by whom? Could have been a bad day, could have been a mistake. So it's important that they be masters.
Your computer's frozen now.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, it is? Well, something's freezing my computer. Catherine, could you play with it? No, but you're much better than me. Okay, so her son is a fantastic genius. And it's worked backwards. It's genetically gone the other way. Okay, so.
I need to be able to see it too.
So you get these three. Okay, you get these three plates, and if you relabel them, vernacular, idiomatic, and academic, something very curious happens. How does the English language become official? The official language. The Oxford English Dictionary does it. How does the Oxford English Dictionary do it? The language always arises from the people, from the vernacular, like Googling, or you can think of a million words that come up, like that dance they do now. What's it called? What is it? Twerking. Okay, so twerking. Okay, twerking came out of the vernacular. Okay, so what happens is that Tom Wolfe uses it. He uses it idiomatically. He says, "Yo, boy, we went twerking." Okay, I must have mixed things up. So Tom Wolfe, you know how he writes, or Kunst. Okay, so you get a recognized author that uses twerk. And then what happens is the officials at the OED say, oh, should we consider this? And as you know, the OED actually shows the quotation. It actually shows the author quoting it. And it's an author of authority. And then it enters the OED, and twerking is now part of the English language. Okay. That is exactly what this is doing. What this does, all of these orders that I can show you, all of these orders, these are the treatises, these are the orders, it's about 300 of them. All of these orders are idiomatic.
Just can't cancel it.
Okay, so all of these orders are idiomatic. Okay, so these are all the orders. Here they are in this book by date. Okay, all of these orders are idiomatic, and they all have a history. So what we do is they're all drawn the same way. Here's the building, and we draw 3 bays. There's a stick figure. There's a scale figure. This one is frontal. It rotates slightly, like that, by perspective. This is a cut through it, and this view is taken 6 feet in front and below it. Each of these conventions come from different treatises. Okay, and then, by the way, then we do a vast, we draw these plates that have 260 of these incredible orders all put together, drawn either to the same scale, or to the same diameter, or to the same height, which is the three systems that are used. And the exciting thing is that they look like the bar scene at Star Wars. They don't look like who's the painter? Norman Rockwell's Thanksgiving scene. Okay, the 5 orders of the Renaissance is the Thanksgiving scene, white, mother, mom, grandmother, and the turkey in the middle. Really nice, really safe, but not that exciting. What's exciting is the bar of Star Wars, in which the purple tall guy and the green little one are talking to each other. Now, what's interesting about the bar of Star Wars? Anybody can draw a purple tall guy and a little green guy. The interesting thing is that they're talking to each other. Okay, that's what's interesting. And what classicism has in common is that all of these architects are talking to each other. The modernists are not talking to each other. Rem is doing like this, and Eisenman is doing like that, and Zaha is doing like that, and they're not relating at all. We have a huge conversation that's fascinating, and they're conversing with each other, all these people. Okay, so that's really what is astounding. Okay, so this is the first one that happens, and here you see what's attempted. If you look at the late treatises, what a lot of people try to do is they try to say, okay, we got the orders, but we're going to do the French order, which was an early one, or the German order, or the English order, and this is the Russian order. And what they do is they screw around with the elements, but they never, ever, ever tamper with proportion. And this is the last, I just showed this as representational. The fact that they actually changed the ornamentation, but never with the proportion. So what is the first order that actually is heterodox? And that's another one by this guy. You see, always is the correct proportion. The first one that I find, and I couldn't believe how great this was, is George Washington in the East Porch of Mount Vernon. He's the first heterodox order. By the way, you know that Jefferson does conventional orthodox orders. The genius, the architectural genius, is actually not Jefferson. It's actually Washington. This building is incredible. It's the most American building. The section is incredible. It is completely pragmatic the way it adjusts. And he takes his columns, makes them longer, and makes them wider. And by the way, the profiles are absolutely right. He had Batty Langley, right, referring to it, and you can see in the window on this side of his office, and they're also made out of timber. It's the first order that doesn't take this wooden staves and tries to pretend they're stone. It does them with boards. So we got this architectural genius, George Washington, that makes the first American completely pragmatic order and breaks the rules while knowing what the rules are. And you start finding these threads. Like, look at this fantastic guy. This Harsdorff was a Dane who was the teacher of Schinkel and Hansen, right? Harsdorff, and look at how he does this one. Okay, the Doric, I mean the Ionic, actually instead of being running this way, runs the other way, and he dematerializes the wall. By actually, the wall is masonry, and he actually, in an almost Nisian glass plate, disappears the wall because it's both inside and out, running in the other direction. By the way, this gets picked up. This gets picked up later for example, by Klenze in the Hermitage in London. So you get this German stuff, this great German sort of intellectual and very, very clean stuff. And Ledoux, the revolutionary architects, and this is where it begins expressing. Like, look at that order. Look at that. He says, I am a barrier. I am a barrier, and you're going to goddamn pay your taxes here. Look at how that expresses it. You know, it isn't just a rotunda. The order expresses it very, very clearly. You know, you better pay your taxes because you're in trouble. If you don't, and this is Ledoux again, look at that order. Okay, pay your taxes, you're entering Paris. Or the incredibly elegent foyer. This is a shopping street in Paris. How elegant can you get? You know, with that order. He's expressing, come spend your money here. This is a classy place. Friedrich Gilly, a 30-year-old proto-Prussian. Okay, these are guards, tiny columns, but saying we are, you know, we're essentially a militaristic empire. Look at the antithesis. It's absolutely standing there. It's standing there like a warrior. Try it. Just try it. Okay, try to come in. And this is where you start seeing these guys actually manipulating it. Because Gilly again, Friedrich Gilly, okay, who actually studied with Schinkel at the same time but died at 30. And by the way, how do we get these? We get these from everywhere. We get them from photographs of buildings, from buildings themselves, or from sketches. For example, Gilly, it was all sketches. And the wonderful thing about these computers is that many of these have never been drawn before. They're just little sketches by Gilly. We're acting like archaeologists. And look at that. That's Christian Friedrich Hansen. Okay? And here's Hansen in the jail. Look at this order. Look at the date. 1803. Is that 03? I can't tell. Anyway, it's very early. Look at that. Look at how it's bolted together. You know what this says? I'm a jail. Immediate visibility. Breaking rules. Oh, Soane. My God. I mean, everybody says Soane is great, Soane is great, Soane is great. Okay, I understand Soane's great. Explain it. Like, what's he doing? Like, how do we bring this guy into the discourse? So it isn't just trust us is great. It's the most modern. Look at this. When you actually see these things drawn inside and out, it's the most modern. Look at that thing. And by the way, this gets picked up by the Cornell School architects of Colin Rowe. This was the fundamental order of the Colin Rowe students in the 80s and 90s in postmodernism. Have you noticed what they look like? Now, those guys are fantastic. Why aren't they among the classicists? We, the new urbanists, we absorb them. We're a generation earlier. They're not exactly on the same page we are, but they're new urbanists. But the classicists say, no, those Cornell guys, I'm talking about Michael Dennis and Fred Coder. They're ours. They're not modernists. They're ours. And actually, Soane provides it. Look at Jones Soane on top. Look at that order. Talk about proportions. Look at these. Okay, look at that pair of orders. Do you remember that just the other day we found, who was that Bulgarian or Romanian architect? Brancusi. So Brancusi in 1930 comes up with a new order, which we're about to draw, that actually are clusters of 4 based on this. Who knew that Brancusi was speaking to Soane? Who knew? You know, it's just this guy and 2 weird guys. I mean, we love them, we don't love them. It's not a matter of taste. There's an incredible discourse. And look at Peter Speck. Look at this up here. Look at that. Look at how that resolves the beam, and it actually deals with the shedding of rain, which is a perennial problem. By the way, that's Michael Graves' favorite building. And he's continually quoting it, which then brings Michael Graves into our discourse. Peter Speck. John Soane again. This is John Soane's tomb for himself. What are we looking at here? Look at that. You know what he's saying? I'm a druid. In the end, I'm just an English druid guy, and I actually believe in the gods of the forest. I forget this Christian thing. And it's as clear as can be, although he doesn't write it. But he's expressing this. How can you otherwise explain his tomb? And by the way, one of the exercises of all this is you have to unwrap it and resolve it. By the resolving it and ending it and doing the ends, actually discloses the brilliance or failure of the order. Because you have to manipulate it, see if it can actually deliver. So that's Stone's tomb. And then John,
more trust.
there was this one or the prior?
The prior one.
Yeah, there was a little bit of this. But it's actually etched in.
A little bit Aeolic.
Yeah, it's Aeolic but the fact that it's etched in and it's showing, by the way, and we are a very provincial people compared to Rome. He's absolutely clear about where he stands relative to Rome. Instead of these other Englishmen are pretending, oh, well, we're here in London, then we might as well be in Rome. There's a lot of distance between Rome and London. So why don't you settle down and express that, which is what this guy did. And look at John Nash. It's absolutely brilliant. I've got the date 1820. Now we look at that and we say, oh, I'm not even going to look at that. I mean, John, he's very good. I mean, he's very good. We love Nash, but isn't this proto-modern? No, it is not proto-modern. This isn't the first of the modernists. This is a fabulous classicist, and we know very well he's a classicist, but because of the filter of the Renaissance, we never look at this. We never see it as an order. We see it as some weird other thing. Schinkel. He knew classicism perfectly. So why is he doing this? Look at that order. You know what he's saying? Hey, I'm a country house. And it's a little bit, and a country house is not the Altes Museum. And we're not going to use the same order on the Altes Museum and my little country house, even though they're both in Berlin. So why are people putting full-fledged, flat out, complete canonical orders on little old country houses? Terrible Palladian problem. You don't do that. You basically are destroying the hierarchy and the legibility of what classicism can deliver. But here's the lesson of Schinkel saying, no, let's work it out differently. I'm a country house. And Robert Mills next door. Okay, now Robert Mills, this is next door. This is one building away.
So okay, you see it right out the window.
Okay, you see it right out the window. So you look at this and you say, what the hell? You know what it says? I'm made out of 5 cylinders of wood. I am a wooden order. How about expressing that for a change? Instead of taking what is essentially a lithic proportion, a stone proportion, this fat, and then making the order out of staves that actually be laminating all the time and pretending you're made out of stone. Like, what's so great about that? Like, what is so intelligent about making a stone order out of Greece, out of a bunch of woods, a tremendous effort in some provincial Southern American city, instead of actually thinking clearly and saying, I'm made out of wood, and it requires a different expression. And this is by a guy who knew what he was doing. This is Robert Mills. This isn't some hit. And then look at Friedrich Schinkel. Look at his cantilever. Check that out. Okay, so this is actually an ionic running front and back in order to cantilever a balcony. First introduction of this language, a huge widening of the language before. This is Robert Mills saying, I'm a basement. Okay, basement, a lot of weight above me. Okay, this actually, I'm sinking a little bit into the dirt, and you know you're in the basement. And this Gottlieb Bindesball, fantastic actually. This is an ionic, this is Aeolic, right? No, what is this? Anyway. Okay, so here's Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Is this octagonal? An octagonal order without an abacus. And by the way, this is the palace in Oreanda for the Empress of Russia. This isn't like I gotta cut my budget here. It's not like I'm having a bad day. Because people look at it and say, well, if I had done it, I'd say, well, poor Duany, he doesn't know what he's doing. Poor Miami. What can we say? Or you can say, well, he had a bad contractor and they forgot the abacus today. There's all this shit that goes through people's minds. Like, how do you actually tell a kid that this is what an order is, and then say, oh, by the way, Schinkel's a good architect? Just deal with it. It's not. And and guess what this is? Look at that order, okay? That is the first floor. Do you remember the Palace at Orianda by Schinkel that has the Greek temple on top? That's what's below it. And it's saying, I am in a cave. Look at the profile of this thing. Why isn't that in, why don't the kids, can't you show this to the kids, get them excited about something? And von Klenz is so elegant in the way this is resolved in the Hermitage, in which one column becomes 4 columns. By the way, it's even better when you draw it with the room. Labrouste, who basically attempts to have a stone base and for the first time a steel spanning, and he takes a Ferrari out for a spin. I think he loses. I think it's totally unresolved, incredibly inelegant. He took it on the edge of the precipice and fell off. But we still remember the attempt.
Wait, why?
He did really well.
We can go, you have to read the book. Henry Austin making that allusion to Egypt and death. This is in New Haven. William Strickland, there's actually a run of Egyptian work that happens. Look at this, Isambard Kingdom Rome. Wow! Like, what do you think? Is that the first of the modernists, or is that a fantastic cornice? Like, is that one of theirs or one of ours? Why would we want to grant that to a modernism? Why concede that one? And Alexander, of course, Greek Thompson, fantastic. Okay, Albert Shadow. What you find, you begin to start finding orders that are very, very thin, and they're always associated with pleasure. You see them in Asplund in the theater at night. You see them in the dining room of Morris Lapidus. You see it in the houses of the people in Hollywood, the party houses in front of the pool. And you see them, and they come from Pompeii in the frescoes, and they're about let's party, okay, as opposed to let's bury people. You know, it's really different, but it's clearly classical. Alexander Thompson again, okay. Talk about the canon. There are 14 million Mormons, right? One of the most successful religions. What is their main building? It's the Mormon Tabernacle, built in 1864, fully classical, and this building is huge. It's spanned by bridge builders, like the trusses in there are what they use to bridge the railway bridges. And look at the order that's developed. The order that's developed in Mormon Tabernacle is clearly classical, isn't it, once you draw it? Why are we always looking at the Vatican? What about the Mormons? Can we look at that? And then we begin looking at the Chinese and what they do. I'm not going to get to it, but what about the Hall of the People, the Great Hall of the People in Beijing? You have a Chinese student? Have you ever looked at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, done in 1956? You know, in a classical way, but made Chinese? Well, you know, that's a connection there. You don't have to go all the way back to the Imperial Palace. You can actually do something which is actually the second most important building in China is a classical building. The Japanese Parliament is a classical building. The new, finished last year, the new house for the President of Turkey, finished last year, extravagantly presented in the New York Times, quite good, is classical. And by the way, when I showed it to this crowd, they said kitsch. It's not kitsch, it's fantastic. It's beautifully built by one of the most talented architects. By the way, I followed the teacher of that guy. He's an incredibly talented kid. In other words, what I'm saying, look, we say this is, why do you think it's kitsch? Because Palladio wouldn't have done it? Do you really think the Turks are uncivilized? Do you really think that the guy's teacher didn't think that was a brilliant student? Do you think it was a mistake? No, it's your filter that makes you think it's kitsch. I'm sorry, but that's all it is.
Detailing is kitsch.
No, it's not kitsch. They knew what they were doing. The guy can do a straight building. Giles Gilbert Scott showing,
You
hey,
can do a straight building, but if you didn't do it there, then it's kitsch. You can do it. You have to
It's
continue
not
to do.
pitched there.
it's not kitsch. It's made out of
He
solid
might-
material.
Culture, wherever
Sure.
go.
By the way, and the definition of kitsch is engaged here. The difference between kitsch and folk is sincerity. And this guy was sincere. Sincerity, you just don't agree because it's not Palladian. I mean, you are.
No, that's
I
not
would
true at
have.
all. That's not true at all. Don't accuse me of things you don't even know why I'm calling it that.
Why do you say kitsch?
I say it's kitsch because the detailing of this entirely to say, I have tons and tons and tons of money. I'm more powerful than you.
Right.
And it uses it's that.
How's that different from Versailles?
No, that's his job. He doesn't get it. That's his job. That was the job of the architect. I'm sorry, look at it this way. That's the job of the architect. What you have to say is we have a slight inferiority complex because we lost the Ottoman Empire and we're not exactly aristocratic around here, and we have tons of money, and your job is to make us look good. By the way, when people say Speer is a bad architect, no. Speer manifests Nazism perfectly, okay? And it actually shows what the range of classical architecture to express what it has to express. It doesn't express kitsch, it expresses a very sincere attempt at showing we're nouveau riche. It does express that. It's not a mistake. That's what I'm trying to say.
So why are you saying it's folk and not eclectic? I mean, this all seems like an argument for eclecticism.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. This is good for Scott and the real. No, we will. Look, okay, you have a week, because I'll do a week.
But it's also,
But I think Versailles kitsch too, but that's just me.
it's also a monumental.
Is this kitsch? Why is this not kitsch? Look at this. What is this?
Vernacular.
What is this? Why is this not kitsch? You have to read who it is? It's Richardson.
Says it up there.
Well, why is this not kitsch? Look at it. Look at it. It's the dorkiest building you ever saw. Everything about it's dorky.
I don't.
Look at it. What is this? This is so dorky. That's incredibly dorky. What's that shit on top? Those stars. It's Richardson. At some point you have to say, this is an acknowledged master. He wasn't making a mistake. He was trying to do something. And the fact that I don't understand it immediately means that I am actually not equipped by my intellectual apparatus to understand it.
You acknowledge that the Ferrari can go off the rails, right?
Right.
And you acknowledge that. So
Yeah.
when I look at Erdogan's monument to himself, I say it's going off the rails entirely. This, maybe not. But I don't have to say that this is an acknowledged master, but I've seen these details, the way you draw these sometimes. I don't see it. You take it and abstracted them out.
Of course, that's what all the treatises do.
But the thing is that, I don't know, I can get into it because I don't see some of these as even being columns. And also I sort of see the whole sort of obsession over columns in and of itself is an odd thing.
Okay, fine. You're outside of the discourse. That's cool. That's totally cool. You stay in the fourth recall all you want. Okay?
I'm not obsessed with columns.
You just stay in the fourth recall, and I hope that some of you do remain in the fourth recall because I'm going to have to wheel you up as
Listen,
evidence.
I'll go with legends. I'll go with Goodhue and Kramer, all those guys. We're all in there.
Look at this kitsch guy. Like, look at this guy. Oh my God. Oh Jesus. What is that? Like, what's that? Was that a meringue? Did we make a mistake here? It's Richardson. Alexander Thompson, Viollet Duke, inventing stuff. The fact that it's invented, that it has no archaeological evidence, is not a problem. We actually have invented orders. Why can't you invent an order based on the extension of a pseudo-archaeology? This is Viollet Duke. Okay, Viollet Duke was one of the great geniuses of the 19th century.
Andres.
Eiffel.
A more interesting task might be to find if there are any two architects which are the same. Even when you are doing straight.
You mean if any of these guys actually relate to each other?
Pick any two architects. Any two buildings.
Why is that interesting? I chose them because they were different.
That
Okay, can I just say,
so radical?
each one of these costs $2,000 to draw, so I'm not going to draw something to prove that it looks just like a, like a Greek thing. I mean,
No, I'm saying too, if you compare Nash and Gibbs
yeah,
in their most classical,
yeah.
you'll find they're completely different.
Oh yeah, I know. That was already done. That was
But I
already.
mean, you can't find any two people that do them.
I know, but these. This is what I'm.
And I would even hold that within one architect's work, from one project to the next,
Yes.
they're not the same.
Well, that's fine. Those are very tiny things that's always existed. That's the practice.
This is still the fourth
practice
recall.
is different. What?
This is still the fourth recall. You haven't actually invented anything new.
Oh, I'm not sure. Look at this guy. What's wrong
We're
with
not,
this?
we're,
Gustav Eiffel. Wrought iron. We mean that's not new. That's not a new cornice. That's not a new order. All
This is
perforated.
classicism.
What?
This is classicism.
Of course, it's classicism. I'm not
this is what
inventing.
he calls third recall. You're not just fourth recall. Are we going to do all 160?
No. I didn't know it was a classical order. I've been there a dozen times. I never noticed it was classical because my filters were like this. I literally couldn't see. And then you realize that the guy has an amazing ability. Look at that, like actually the shaft goes in and penetrates the capital. It just goes in, there's a steep. And the way that this wiggles in and out, the way the entablature wiggles in and out, fantastically creative, why not? William Price, Albrecht, Bruce Price, Boise, fabulous. Look at the disappearing cornice. It goes inside the chimney and comes out again. Boise, one of ours. Not a pioneer of the modern movement. Charles Rennie Mackintosh, fabulous thing. Absolutely just folding in and out. Look at this. Look at the way this order folds in. It just shaves in and shaves out. A genius, one of ours. Lawrence Almatadema. Tadema. This is from a painting. Frank Lloyd Wright. By the way, I showed this to Scully. He was astounded. And he said, you must include the concrete bank by Frank Lloyd Wright. Scully actually recommended one, and it was this one. With a screen. Mackintosh. Hanging the cornice. Hanging the cornice. You know, that's actually the way, that can actually also work when it's wood. The cornice, in fact, the board hangs much better than sitting on top. Another Mackintosh, Hans Bolsig, the pioneer of modernism. Have you ever seen a more elegant ionic? The way he resolves it in planes coming back with this beautiful, beautiful thing. Herman Billing, Joseph Maria Albrecht, another Spaniard, Domenican Montaner. Okay, check this out. Louis Comfort Tiffany, made out of glass. These are glass. Glass comes out, colored glass comes out for his own house. This is in Sarasota. Auguste Perret, incredibly elegant concrete. Look at how the abacus is actually inscribed in the, from the front you don't see it, but because of the what you would call it, the scoop here, from below the abacus shows, embedded in concrete, and thereby avoiding that problem you always have of how do you have a column, and then have formwork and pour the concrete without having, and then stucco it with having that additional problem that never works, in which you have to put a sort of shim up there for a while. Hans Bolsig, another modernist. Eliel Saarinen, incredibly beautiful thing. Josef Vago. By the way, then we go into countries. Every country is covered. Otto Wagner, this is an aluminum order. Incredibly sort of glowing aluminum order. Domenican Montaner, and that's a very interesting upside down ionic. Ernest Flagg, check this out. Can you see it here? That order is made out of steel plates in this direction, bolted together. You know, forming fluting. Ernest Flagg, that's in New York. Green and Green. Actually bringing the Japanese order, you know, bringing it in. Dwight Perkins, the great architect of Chicago. Okay? Auguste Perret, violet in his early years. Peter Behrens, okay, is that a temple or not? Okay, is that one of theirs or one of ours? What is it? But check this out. You know what the key is? Look at this one. You know what this is? Look at that. That here, if you take out the rest, is a huge, giant order. With emphasis and everything. And with a capital. Now, this could thrill a kid, you know. What? Diminution. That could be very thrilling to a kid. Anton Rosen, by the way, this one is made out of staves. See these columns? They're wood, but they're actually made out of staves that are separated, so you can say, I'm only the shape of stone, but I'm obviously made out of wood. Then this gets picked up by actually 100 years later, or 50, no, about 100 years later, it gets picked up by the architects of Seattle, Washington. Sandelia, Stigley, all of these famous guys are ours. Henrik Tessendorf, proto-fascist. Otto Wagner. By the way, the dating is really interesting, because you think this is very late, and you think Otto Wagner is very early. This juxtaposes things. The great architect of Prague, Josef Gokar, Adolf Loos. Is that one of theirs or one of ours? Bernard Mayberg. Ragnar Osberg. Okay, Ragnar Osberg, the greatest architect, in my opinion, of the 30th century. He does a house for himself in the woods. Look at that capital. What's going on? Like, what is going on? Did he buy it secondhand? No, he's saying, you know what? I'm a rural country house, and I'm not that sophisticated. I'm in the country, cool it. We're going to do a little thing, it's not going to be correct. You know, would you really do a house in the Swedish woods with a full-out Palladian everything as if you were in Rome or Vicenza? Ridiculous. That's kitsch. That is kitsch. You know what's kitsch? Is bringing the full classical orders of the Renaissance and applying it to some rich person's house, you know, in some provincial thing, a two-bit, you know, banker getting a full classical treatment. That's kitsch.
It's not a Charleston, isn't it?
No, I'm sorry. You know, you should give them one of these, because that's what they deserve.
Andrés, right?
Yep, I'm almost done. Augsburg High School. Sorry. Anyway, so it goes. But you get the feeling that there is actually an incredible range of education. Incredible. That we're denying ourselves actually talking about, you know, maidens and matrons and men. It's just so ludicrous. The way we've limited the expression of the language. Anyway, that's not even